Dr. Randy Bach, and I'm here with the Newton Taxpayers Association. We're here for Taxpayer Talk, and I'm thrilled today to have a guest. We're going to mention him in just a second, but before I do that, I want to thank all of you out there in TV land or on internet land, or even not even watching this. I'm thanking everybody, irrespective of the fact that we were able to get the work done and defeat the override attempt. There were 3 ballot questions, 2 debt exclusions, and those basically go to construction. So a lot of people went for those because they feel like they're getting something for their money. But they took, or at least they coincided, but they might not have heard any of our words, but they coincided and aligned with our thoughts that at the very least the city had not presented an adequate budget proposition. They had not tightened their own belts before they asked to tighten ours, and they voted no on the main ballot question of the $9.25 million request. Anyway, so thank all of you for this. And we are the Newton Taxpayers. Please come visit us on Facebook and so forth. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, so I apologize for delaying the intro for my guest. I'm completely honored and happy to have with me, I think, the longest serving city councilor in Newton history. Second, or 32 years serving in the Newton City Council. This is Paul Coletti, who's with us today. And he is a lifelong Newton resident, and he's lived all over Newton. And I'm so happy to be able to leverage and benefit from his knowledge and wisdom. So, Paul, thank you for being on our show.
Randy, you know, it was nice. It was happenstance, and it was certainly my pleasure to be able to be here tonight with you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And the people at home, the Taxpayers Association people, who I have known for many, many years, from back in 1978, when I first got introduced to politics.
Yeah, well, I hope to measure up. You mentioned some of the big names, so maybe we'll just go down the Hall of Fame of Newton Taxpayers. I mean, you mentioned some people, hoping I can live up to them. I'm not sure I can, but...
some of them were feisty. Joe Alexander, Lorenz Muther, and those were some, and Sam Robbins. And,
I remember Sam Robbins.
Sam Robbins and Arnold Garrison, and even some of the newer guys, Al Ciccinelli and Joe DeDuca, you know, people who were very, very strong Republicans. So there's been a long tradition of active participation, and the budget time was when the Taxpayers Association, and they were really one of very few people who ever showed up for the public hearings and to make the case for the taxpayer. But some of the old timers were extremely strong and vociferous, and they weren't going to be shut down, so they always got their word in. But you know, many times they were not given the consideration that they should have.
Well, that's well said. Thank you so much. So I would like to spend as much of our time today to leverage your knowledge and wisdom about the city and maybe the city's course, pathway. Where are we right now, in your view, and kind of a big picture? We'll do the big picture first. And where, in a smaller picture, kind of a photograph picture, do you see this most recent no to the override vote?
All right, well, you know, I come from a long reign, so to speak. I was the chairman of the Finance Committee from 1984 to 2009. 26 consecutive years, and before that, from 78 to 84, I was vice chairman of finance. So, you know, that's the longest stint as chairman of finance. I think the previous person before me was only 3 years. Mm-hmm. So during that period of time, I was lucky enough to be able to do things like, in 1986, put together the financing for the new main library, and put together the financing for the growth and renovation of the high schools, and keeping the budget somewhat sane. You know, during those periods of time, there were attempts to override Prop 2.5, but basically in 2011 and in 2008, it failed.
Right. I think 2013 it succeeded.
In 2013 it was approved,
yeah. But
twice it's been approved, and the rest of the times it has been either dissuaded or it's been rejected. Mm-hmm. And so basically during that period of time, we've always delivered our budget on time. Mm-hmm. There was only one time that the budget had to be moved along because the alderman, over a couple of branch libraries and one police officer position, weren't ready to approve it and wanted to send it back, and we needed to move it because our bond rating was at
All right.
in jeopardy.
So how do the old, the before times compare to, say, the current run-up? I'm just going to preface this a little bit with my own more recent history and analysis, which is that, I've kind of categorized everything into the before times, like pre-COVID, when things were relatively normal. But even in the before time, from the decade, I think it was pretty copacetic decade for the country as a whole, from like 2011 to 2021 or so, or 2010 to 2020. We had a very low rate of inflation nationwide, and yet the city of Newton was always hitting the max, 2.5%. And if you take cumulatively for that decade, I think their tax rate went up high, but I think 20% higher, maybe 30% higher than would have been accrued just by merely observing the rate of inflation. So housing prices went up, their housing stock went up, and then they kept jacking up on the 2.5 maximum. So none of that went along with a rainy day fund. There was no kind of putting things towards pensions and whatnot. Our pension coverage is, I think, the lowest amongst, kind of the quasi-luxury towns surrounding the west side of Boston. Compared to Lexington and Wellesley, I think we do very poorly. But at any rate, so that's a preface, and you can accept that or not. But the question is, how have things changed, and how did the city council change in its, say, fiscal management?
Well, I mean, one thing I would just say is that as it relates to the pension fund in the city of Newton is only one of very few communities that is self-funding its pension system. Now, up until a few years ago, we actually administered it ourselves, but we were only able to put it in like 0.1% interest bank accounts. And so we actually joined the state, and we put our money into a pool, and their rate of return isn't that much better. But today, we have close to, I think it's $50-something million set aside in pensions for the city workers and school people. And you need to understand something. When we were going to join the state pension system, we were going to have to give all of our money to the state. And then they'd be able to split that up and divide it amongst the other communities. So we got the best of both worlds. We got to keep that money under our name and basically be able to pool it for a better investment with the state. And so, so the real point is that we're one of the only communities that is not doing what is called pay-as-you-go. And that's why I did not want to put a lot of money into the pension systems, because everybody, the Commonwealth, everybody appropriates the money every year for the pensions. No one has that pool.
I hear all the time, and I've looked online, and the rate of unfunded liability.
But that doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't.
Randy. It really doesn't, because you're always going to have people who are working. You're never going to have everybody retire. It's not like what's happening with the bank failures. People are going to retire slowly. They're going to put their years in. And in the meantime, that fund has gone up dramatically. It was $35 million. We've always had positive investment. The comptroller oversees the investments, and we had it originally with outside investment firms, but now the state fund.
So you don't think it's any way putting off the inevitable, and that there's going to be some larger sum to pay at a later date?
In fact, well, there may be, but the other thing that we fund is our own health insurance plan. We spent $73 million this year on health care for the retirees, the teachers, and the city workers. And we don't depend on somebody else. We have catastrophic insurance if somebody's heart,
So what is it then when I read, I don't have the slide up right now, but when I read that, like say Lexington has 83% of its liabilities funded, Wellesley 85%, and we are down about 57 to 61% funded liabilities. And then the mayor herself and the mayor before that said they were going to make a better effort to get a higher rate of the liabilities being funded. It applies to me, and maybe I'm making the wrong inference, it implies to me that we are not matching some bill that's going to come due later. And again, stop me if I'm wrong.
Well, we've always had to put about $15 to $17 million a year into the pension fund to keep fulfilling our obligations.
But have not salaries gone up? Commensurate? I mean,
well,
along the way?
yes, but I mean, one of the biggest fallacies and one of the problems that we have is everybody likes to compare Newton to all the local towns that are west of us or slightly north of us. A lot fewer employees, the salaries aren't as high, and basically So it's very easy for those communities to be able to, and their schools, far fewer schools. Lexington, maybe a little, but if you compared us to Quincy, I doubt Quincy's got a.
All right, well, so that's, I'm going to put a mental note for that. I'll try to check on Quincy per se.
I mean, they're equivalent to us.
Fair enough. I mean, I don't know if they're really equivalent because I think we have a better housing stock. We have a higher.
But they have a bigger business, bigger commercial. You know, the commercial business, because you're bringing in 175% of the residential taxes, and the businesses don't have kids in the schools. So, you know, like Cambridge also, extremely large tax base because their commercial properties bring in the money. Newton, 11% of the city's commercial brings in almost 19% of the revenue.
Fair enough. Well, that's interesting. I'll have to circle back on that in future episodes. But getting back to the budget, the big part of the current budget, of any current budget, and it's been going on for quite some time, is is the school. The schools, plural. And I think it verges now, it's over 50%. I think it's nearly 60%.
64%.
Yeah, and I think that number has edged up over time. I think it used to be in the 50s, and now it's in the low 60s. And that is kind of the elephant in the room, how you manage that. I bring this up because we are in interesting times. Nobody wants to live in interesting times, but we are. Economically, we have the highest inflation rate we've had since probably
The 80s.
Jimmy Carter.
82.
Yeah, right. It was the ghost of Jimmy Carter, or the early Reagan years, and then after Reagan kind of fixed things and got the economy running better, we have had pretty much close to zero inflation ever since. So we had, what is it, at least in the high 30s, 38 years of excellent low inflation, something not to worry about. I'm old enough to remember the high rates of inflation. I think it was like 14% one year under first year of Reagan. But again, it was kind of
came down. But
yeah, it came down.
That's because we had the oil embargo then. When oil and fossil fuels are impacted, then what happens is inflation
we see some aspects of that now. But anyway, so we had basically good times. We had kind of a smooth run of the economy. But nonetheless, the school budget seems to be outpacing even the accretion that we have naturally accruing, from this 2.5% increase every time, at least, or more with overrides, and then more kind of floating on the increase from the override. So the question I have is, has this been managed? I mean, I was going to actually say during dire economic times, companies cut back. I think Apple cut back 20% of its workforce. Google cut back 25% of its workforce. Twitter, like 60% of its workforce. And these are, major companies with a major product. In Apple's case is, real items, Apple computers and so forth. And they're all cutting back, and they actually have products they make. They have to kind of obey the rules of the market in order to stay lean and mean and compete with each other. We as a city have not seen the cutbacks, and even though they were, in a sense, promised or warned about last year, in the face of COVID, this is a long question, I apologize, but in the last couple of years, with COVID, people have made exodus from the schools. I think 1 in 5 kids are gone from the schools. Parents, with the school essentially free, with sunk cost of paying taxes or being here, paying rent, they get free schools, and even so, they're willing to pay $30,000 to $50,000, whatever the number is, to take their kids out somewhere else. I think it's an indictment on the school system, which is the main product of our school budget, but there has not been any commensurate, like Apple and Google and Facebook and Twitter, all dropping their employee force. We haven't seen any of that.
Let me try to answer that part of it. And if you put out ask people to give their request, and you said to them, Newton is known for rubbish collection, good fire protection, good police protection, good snow plowing, and good teachers. Now, that's the bulk of the people who work on the municipal side. The question is, if you had your choice, would you get rid of policemen, firemen, teachers, people who collect the trash, or people who plow the streets? The rest of the people, there are like 20-something hundred employees.
The answer to every question on earth, you're older than I am, but I think. Yeah. But the answer to every question on earth is it depends. So in this case, I'm only talking about a recent failure. I think COVID, the cloud within the silver lining within the cloud of COVID was that people got to see what was going on in the schools. They had Zoom schools, And so people were at home. I think they were dissatisfied with the product. They were also dissatisfied the schools were still closed. The Catholic schools stayed open, and they didn't lose a year.
And they grew.
They grew. So just and mind you, the Catholic schools pay, I think, about 65% of the salaries that Newton public schools pay. I had a whole slide set prepared tonight.
The reason for that, though, is that the teachers were the ones that were opposed to go working in the classroom, and they drove the situation where the schools were closed and people were learning from home. They bought every one of them computers, and basically no one really knew during the day whether the kids were really learning. And the problem and the reason why people have left the city was that the people who were baby boomers and people who realized the value of their property has gone up so dramatically that, I say this when I run into people at the grocery store or when people ask me what's happening. The smart people have left.
So what does that say about us?
Well,
Paul?
you know what I mean? You either love this city and you love what the city stands for. Let me ask you a question.
Or you don't have kids in the school
Why
anymore.
do people who land on our shores come to Newton? I mean, the homes that are being bought these days aren't being bought by people who are moving up from one house to another. They're being bought by people who believe in the city and believe what it offers. How you take advantage of that, some people, Mayor Mann used to say to everybody, you're going to be able to live here, send your kids to our schools, you bought a house for $60,000,
Right.
you're going to sell it for $3 million. What better deal could that be?
No, I get it. So when I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in the Bronx, and so I was a Yankee fan, although my kids have grown up differently. Anyway, my brothers have sort of disowned me over at least that. Well, they haven't disowned me, but over that single aspect, they remain tried and true Yankees fans. Anyway, but my cousins were up in Boston, and they actually lived in Newton. So I came to Newton from days one or whatever. My early memories are coming to Newton, and it was a wonderful place. But everyone said the schools were just incredible. Everyone came for the schools. I don't think that's the case anymore. I had another slide I was going to show tonight. We have basically, again, not comparing to Quincy, but comparing to local, Metro West suburbs, we are on the lower tier as far as educational outcomes in the Newton schools, and that was never the case before. I know you mentioned kind of the dichotomy between Newton South and Newton North. So my kind of the summary question I'm coming at, and I'm kind of stabbing away, is if Apple makes computers and Apple makes smartphones and Apple makes operating system and Apple does this and that, and then people stop buying it to the rate of 20%, Apple would be like, they'd be pulling their hair out, like, what are we doing? We have to fix this. We have to get back on track. The Newton schools, I think, have become a failure in a sense, and what we see is in this case an override, which was supposed to just keep everything kind of going status quo ante, and without acknowledging the fact that they might be at this point with 20% fewer students, 1,400 students, I think, fewer in the district. Basically the equivalent of the two schools we just renovated, 826 elementary kids gone. There's no accommodation of maybe shuttering, not closing forever, not selling, but maybe, making dormant, mothballing a school temporarily until they can show that they can bring kids back. And if they have a good product, people will buy it. That Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. Well, we're building it. I'm not sure people are coming.
I think that probably the only thing that I wasn't too pleased about, but they wanted to do it, was offer preschool education, offer that to 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds before they actually went to kindergarten. And that was kind of a way to provide daycare, for these young kids so the parents could both work. But to be honest with you, I think the real belief of this whole thing is that it was time for a lot of the baby boomers to move on. And when you look at the number of houses and how long they stay on the market, houses don't stay on for more than a week. There are usually, fights over who's going to buy the property. So people want to come in.
I get it.
And people want to leave.
We have certain immutable characteristics. I mean, we have, presume they still number it the same way. We have exit 17. Might have a different number system, but we are basically the first exit out of Boston, and that's lovely. The Mass Pike, I like it. You have to pay for it, but it's a great road. Boom, you're right in Copley Square or downtown. Pretty easy. So I moved here because I was working in Revere, and it's kind of like a reasonably straight shot. Done. Okay, and I've enjoyed Newton. My kids went to school here. They were 8 and 4 years old when we moved, and I think they had a reasonable time. I don't think the schools were all that was cracked up to be. Totally separate topic. But we didn't pull them out. We didn't have the schools shuttered, and we didn't see an exodus of the schools at that time. So my major point is that, I don't know if you can address this or feel as if you should, but has there been adequate kind of financial constraint from the city council or the mayor in the more recent past, over this previous decade till the 2020, and what's going on now? What was your take on this override? How did you vote, and what do you think should be happening from here on in?
The most important thing is that all the way back to when Prop 2.5 was approved, it was very clear that it would be very difficult to operate cities and towns, more so cities than towns, because of the demands. And we had to really go through an accelerated revaluation, or we would have had to cut $12 million from the budget back then. So, so what's happened is to assume that in order to encourage good teachers to come to the city and other people who are necessary as employees to the city, 2.5% per year. I'm surprised that there's never been a move for an underride or something like that. But I'll tell you, in Holliston, they just reduced the tax rate by almost $2 because there were some financial things that were better than what they anticipated, and they actually dropped the tax rate. But I think to expect 2.5% every year is not out of the realm, especially with the enterprise. We're a very $50 billion city. But the most important thing is that the mayor has to have the focus on staying and looking at the new growth. But the overrides, we should never need an override. And I will say to you this.
So I like that.
Well, I'll say to you this. Here's where we're at. You're asking what my position is? Tomorrow, the mayor should be starting this new budget process. And last year was $15.9 million, the increase in the budget. And that's the largest increase in the history of the city. Now, right now, just going up to 2.5%, not even figuring the new growth, they could pass a budget without even going through 90 days of scrutiny for $17.2 million out of the funds that are going to come in and the local receipts, which are almost 50% underfunded. This year's surplus, and this is what I said when I spoke out against the override, you needed to wait until June 30th, until this book, the Comprehensive Financial Report, is the latest book, and that was June of 2022. Okay?
Right. So it's going to come out again.
It's going to come out
June 23.
in September of 2023. Now, if the citizens had the chance to read that, you'll see how much money is hidden. And I saw it, and it bothered me so much that I had to take a position. I mean, and I had to come out and publicly say that proposing this override was disingenuous, and that was my quote, because the people who were asked to lead the fight on this override were neophytes, people who hadn't done it before, and they had no help. They had very few.
Well, I'm not sure they had no help.
Well, they had very few politicians helping.
Well, I don't know if that's actually accurate. I think there was behind the scenes. I think I think the Yes campaign had some access to mailing lists and so forth they might not otherwise have had. We have only 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So I'm enjoying this.
The No people had their list too. I mean, Lenny Gentile sent out robocalls. I sent out robocalls, and they were very effective.
Well, I'm going to leave that there because I'm not going to comment on that. But I think there was more money for the Yes campaign
definitely.
Than there was for the No, and I think it's a little bit like the 2016 election where there was more money on one side than the other, and yet the kind of the populist choice came through. And I think frankly, I'm not sure it was the Yes or the No campaign. I think a lot of it is outside exigencies. Basically, the economy going to, Silicon Valley Bank. People have a lot of uncertainty. I'm not sure people want to spend.
You read the document that we were talking about earlier before the show started.
Right.
And there's an analysis that compares the 2000, the other override, the recent override, to the current override.
Right.
And when you look at what really happened and you see what happened, you can understand that this was not just the little people, the working people,
right.
but some very strong people in Ward 8, Ward 5, Ward 4, and Ward 1 who coalesced and reversed the numbers.
Right.
So, and they did it the hard way. And you know something, those wins are the ones that make people stronger and make them happy about it.
Yeah, no, I have to thank you for that. So it wasn't a little bit inimical. I think what Paul is referring to, Mr. Coletti is referring to, is the fact that Ward 8 is, I think, Chestnut Hill, if I have that correct.
Well, Chestnut Hill was 7, that also voted against it. Of Ward 8,
right.
3 of the 4 of the wards.
That's right. It was not just the normal, I mean, that's a ward that goes Democrat. It's kind of a very high income, but very left-leaning.
Ward 5 in Woburn, the highest per capita income.
Right, so I think people had a financial sense that it's like, you know, all these other companies are having to retrench, retract, you know, reformulate, you know, whatever, and the city's not. The city's just
Well,
gonna
one other
go for more
thing.
money.
They spent $250,000, the mayor, on this override vote. It very easily could have been postponed.
Exactly.
And we could have gone through the closing of the
I'm going to
books,
give you another fist bump.
closing of the books, certifying
Right.
free cash,
I said,
and then turning around and moving forward with
right.
a budget.
It almost seems like we're the same person, but you can see we're two different people here. It's like Clark Kent and Superman. But I said all along, why couldn't this wait till November? If it's that important, so forth, have it when people actually go to the polls, and have it when people are going to be, you know, going on a regular date, not in the middle of March on a, you know, rainy, potentially
Well,
horrible
it's done
snow
on
date.
purpose. They were hoping
And not
that-
only that, but moreover, they've chose a date where the private schools are on vacation and the public schools are not, so that the
And the
people who
elderly-
already voted with their wallets away are not necessarily going to vote with their ballots.
And the elderly are in Florida.
Right. And so it just seemed inimical. And people, the city councils, if they're all in favor of this, they can run on it. School committee people who, mind you, in my view, should not have been campaigning for this, because the school committee is essentially the boss on the other side of the negotiating table with the union, the NTA. Anyway, we're going to have to closing up. Any final
Well,
words?
I would just say that, in fact, there'll be further discussion on this, I think, in coming weeks. But the mayor's office has to get down to doing a budget and doing a $17 million budget and wrapping up their hands, getting it passed, and then turning around and trying to not spend money in the next 3 months between now and the end of the
Right.
year, so that we maximize
All right.
free cash.
And my recommendation is to go look at the Boston Globe from 1 year ago and see that there were proposed, you know, 40 potential jobs based on the fact that the schools had declining enrollment. They have had 0 of those kind of drop in employment. In fact, I think they've added 4 employees amongst the schools. So I think you have to budget, and you have to budget in order to budget.
You're right.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
We appreciate it.